Hello and welcome to this second part of the Stripe subscriptions tutorial. In the last video, we set up the Firebase project with the Stripe extension and we added authentication to the Vue.js project that we created. In this video, we're going to be setting up the Stripe webhooks to update the subscription information in Firebase Firestore. We're going to be styling the project with Bootstrap CSS and we're going to be creating the Stripe checkout session for the users to subscribe and the Stripe customer portal session for the users to manage all the billing. I might go a little bit fast, but you can always check out the blog post in the description as well as the GitHub repository with all the code that I'm writing here. Also, you can always access my Discord server where I'm going to be responding to all of your questions, and I'm trying to build a community of developers there, so definitely check that out. If you like this type of content, don't forget to like the video, and now let's get started. Okay, in the last video we set up the Firebase Stripe extension, but we didn't set up a webhook. We need this webhook in order to synchronize everything from Stripe into Firebase Firestore. So go ahead and open your Stripe dashboard, go to Developers tab and then Webhooks. Here we're gonna add a new endpoint. It is gonna ask for an endpoint URL, which is the URL where things like subscription updates are gonna be sent. To get it, go to the extension configuration in your Firebase project, then in the extension documentation, scroll down until you see a Cloud Function URL. We're gonna copy it and paste it in the endpoint URL input, as well as select all the events that are listed here. As you can see, creating the webhook is pretty straightforward, and we're going to be receiving all these events related to product, price, checkout session, customers, payment intents, maybe when a payment fails, and even some optional ones on the tax rate, the invoices, etc. Once you finish adding the events, go ahead and create the endpoint, and then reveal the sign-in secret key and copy it. To then go to the extension configuration, select reconfigure extension and paste it in this Stripe webhook secret input. Once you do that, hit save, and then we're done with the Firebase Stripe extension. Now, in order to have subscriptions in our application, we actually need a Stripe product with recurring payments. So to do that, go to products and then add a new product, pick a name, for example, Pro Plan, and then for the price, I'm going to select standard pricing and recurring monthly. Then I'm gonna add another price, and this one's gonna be also standard pricing, recurring, but this one's gonna be yearly. Once you do that, save the product, and we're done with the Stripe setup as well. Okay, changing topics a bit, we're actually going to start styling our application. For that, we need to install Bootstrap in our Vue project. I'm not going to complicate things too much. We're just going to visit the Bootstrap documentation, copy the CSS link, and paste it in our application index.html. As well as the script tag for Bootstrap. Then we're going to create a navbar to navigate between views, and for that go to the components folder and create a new file called the navbar.vue. I'm going to start by adding a regular Bootstrap navbar that contains some router links to the different views in my application. I'm not going to be explaining these classes too much because all of this I just got it from the Bootstrap documentation, but you can always reference the code to this project in the GitHub repository that I link in the description. Then in the script section of the component, we're going to import the signout function from the Firebase SDK and the Firebase auth instance from the firebase.js file that we created. Then in the data section of the component, we're going to get the current user in case the user is logged in, and we're going to create a logout method that uses the signout function, passes in the Firebase auth instance, and then if everything goes right in the sign out, we redirect to the sign in page. Now with this done, we can now check if the user is signed in. In case there's no current user, we show the sign in button. But if there is a current user, we're going to show a button that takes you to the account page and shows the display name of the user. As well as another button that says logout, and whenever you click it, it runs the logout method. Now we need to put this navbar in every view, and for that we're going to create a layout for our application. So go ahead and create a new folder called layouts, and then add a new file called default layout. And then here we're going to add a template tag, then a div, and inside we're going to import the navbar component. And finally below it, we're gonna add a div with the class container and some margin top 3. And then inside the div, we're gonna add the slot tag. And this slot tag is gonna be replaced by the content of the view. So that's it for the layout file. Now we're gonna go ahead and add it to every view. So we're gonna go to the home page, import the default layout, and then add it right below the template tag with everything else inside. Then we're gonna do the same thing in the account page. Go ahead and import the default layout. And enclose everything inside. Finally, go to the sign-in page, import the default layout, and also enclose everything inside. Now if we run the application and go to the browser, you should be able to see the navbar in every view, as well as the display name when signed in and the logout button working correctly. So at this point, the authentication in the application is ready, and we can move on to implementing the subscription process in the application using Stripe Checkout. For this, we're going to create a price selection component, and this will contain the different prices coming from Stripe that the user can select and subscribe to. We're going to import this component in the account.view page and put it right below the header of the page. Now for this component, we're going to be taking it step by step. So the first thing we need to do is open the script tag, and then since this is the price selection component, we need to bring the different products from the database, because remember, when we updated the products in the Stripe dashboard, they also get updated in the Firebase Firestore database thanks to the webhook that we created. So we're gonna fetch these documents in the component, and for that I'm gonna create a method called fetch products. It's gonna be an asynchronous method, and I'm gonna call it in the mounted section of the component. Then inside this method, I'm gonna call a Firestore instance, and then I'm gonna create a reference to the products collection. Then we're gonna create a query so that we make sure we only bring the active products or the products that have the active attribute set to true. Then we're gonna call the getDocs function, and we need to await this function because it's an asynchronous function. And we're gonna pass in the final products query that we did. Once we have the products documents, we need to get the prices for each of these products. So we're gonna loop through each document, and for each pass, we're gonna reference the prices collection inside the product, and then using the getDocs function, we're gonna get the prices for this specific product. Now that we have the product and all of its prices, we're gonna save this in a variable called products in the data section of the component. So go ahead and add the products variable to the data section as an empty array, and then we can push to this empty array a big object containing the ID of the product, the data of the product, and then a property called prices. And this property prices is gonna contain the list of different prices documents, and each price is gonna contain the ID and the data of the price. So at the end, we're gonna be pushing a big object that contains all the information from the product as well as each of the prices for each product. Now also don't forget that every time we use one of these functions from Firebase, we need to import them. So what we used was the get Firestore, get docs, where, query, and collection, and we need to import this from Firebase/Firestore. Now that was it for the JavaScript part. We're gonna go ahead and create the HTML for this component. And for that, go ahead and add a template tag followed by a div with a class row, and then inside a div with a class column. Then I'm just gonna add a header too that says subscriptions plan and an HR below that, to then start a div that is gonna be a v-for looping through the products array that we created. As the key, I'm just gonna do index-product, and then inside this looping div, we're gonna add a header 3 with the name of the product, and then inside, we're actually gonna be listing the prices for this product. So we're gonna create another div that has a v-for that loops through the product prices. For the key, I'm just gonna do the price index-price. And then inside, I'm gonna add a div with the class form check. This is just a class from Bootstrap. And then inside, we're gonna add an input type radio with the class form check input and some other attributes like the vModel, which is gonna be linked to a variable in the data section, and it's gonna be called selected price. And that way we can keep track of which price the user has selected. And then the value is gonna be the price ID, and the ID of the input is gonna be the price ID as well. Finally, we're gonna add a label. In the for attribute, we're gonna put the price ID, and the class is gonna be form check input. Now, if we go to the browser, you're gonna be able to see the prices listed here, and you can select either of them. Now the next step to do is create a button that takes us to the Stripe checkout page to finalize our subscription process. So for that, go ahead and add a new button that has a class button primary from Bootstrap, and then when clicked, we're gonna run a method called create sub. Now the text in the button is just gonna be create subscription, and we're gonna go ahead and add the create sub method in the method section of our component. This is gonna be an asynchronous method. Now this method is gonna be in charge of creating the URL of the checkout session to which we're gonna be redirecting our users to. For that, we need to add a new document to a specific collection, and then a cloud function created by the Stripe extension is gonna see that new document, and it's gonna create internally a URL, which is gonna be put into this document, and then we're gonna get that URL and we're gonna redirect the users to it. Then first, go ahead and create a variable called isLoading in the data section of the component. And then inside the create sub method, we're gonna set this variable to true, because here is where it's gonna start loading. Then we're gonna get a Firestore instance and save it in a constant called db. Then we're gonna create a collection reference, and we're gonna pass in the database instance followed by the path to the collection, which in this case is going to be customers, then the ID of the current user, and then the collection checkout sessions. As you can see, to get the ID of the currently signed in user, I'm using the Firebase auth instance that we created in the firebase.js file. So go ahead and import that on top of the script tag. Then we're going to be using the @doc function, which we also need to import on top of the script tag. This time we need to wait for the result and save it in a constant called docref. We need to pass in the collection reference and the data that is going to contain the new document. In this case, it's going to be the price, which is just the selected price, the success URL, which is the current URL. So I'm going to put in window.location.origin, and the same for the cancel URL. Okay, so once we create the new document, a cloud function is going to be triggered. And this cloud function is going to create the Stripe URL, and it's going to put it in the same document that we just created. So we need to listen for any changes in this specific document. And for that, we're going to be using the onSnapshot function that we're going to import from the Firebase SDK. And then we're going to be passing in the document reference and a callback function that is gonna receive a snapshot of the document that just changed. And so we need to extract the data from this changed document snapshot. In case there's an error, I'm just gonna print the error and set the loading state to false. But if there's no error, we're gonna check if there's a URL, and if so, we're gonna redirect the user to that URL. Now, before we see the result in the browser, we're gonna go to the button and just use the isLoading variable that we created. We're gonna add a disable property that's gonna be set to true in case the selected price is not present, or if the variable isLoading is set to true. Also, for the text in the button, we're gonna do a conditional statement. In case it is loading, we're gonna show loading, and in case it's not loading, we're gonna show create subscription. Okay, so now we can go to the browser and select any of the prices and click create subscription just to see that it's gonna start loading our session, and then it is gonna take us to the Stripe checkout page. In here you can put in any test card available in the Stripe documentation. In my case, I'm just gonna use the Google Pay option because it's still test mode, so you're not gonna get charged. And once you confirm the subscription, it is gonna get updated in the Firebase Firestore database. So in your database, you're gonna be able to see this change reflected. You're gonna see a new subscription document created, and it's gonna have the status active. Now, going back to the application, it still shows me the plans and the subscribe button. So we need to change this so that if I'm subscribed already, just show me a button to open the customer portal and manage my billing. Now for that, go to your account.view page and add a data section in your component that is going to contain the isLoading variable set to false and a subscription variable set to null. Now add a new method called fetch subscription, and we're going to be calling this method from the mounted section of the component. Now in this method, fetch subscription, we're going to first set the loading variable to true, then we're going to create a Firestore instance, and then we're going to create a collection reference passing in the database instance, and then the path, which in this case is going to be customers, followed by the current user UID, and then subscriptions. Also, don't forget to import every function from the Firebase SDK on top of the script tag. And then we're going to be using a query to actually modify the information that we're getting. We're only going to be getting the subscriptions that have a status of trialing, active, past due, or unpaid. Then we're going to be using the getDocs function to bring the subscription document from Firestore, and we're going to check if there's more than one subscription. We're just going to get the first one, or in case there's no documents, we're just going to set this to null. We're going to save this in the subscription variable, and we're going to set the isLoading variable to false. Now with this done, whenever the page loads, now we're going to have the subscription object ready in the data section of our component. That means we can also use it in the HTML, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to add a div that says loading account information, and it's only going to be visible if the page is loading. Then we're going to add another conditional saying that if there's no subscription, show the price selection component. And then finally, if there is a subscription and the page is not loading, so just v-else, we're actually going to be showing a new component that we're going to be calling subscribe account. And this new component is going to be showing just a button that takes us to the customer portal in Stripe, where the user can manage all the billing. So let's go ahead and open the components folder and create a new file called subscribeaccount.view. Then in the account.view file, we're going to import this new component and add it to the components. We're also going to be passing in the subscription object to the subscribe account component like this. Now going to this new file, we're going to initialize our script tag and the component, and we're going to add a prop called subscription, just like we did in the account.view file. Now for the HTML, we're just gonna open a template tag, a div with the class row, and then inside a div with the class column, followed by a header 2 that says subscribe account, and then below that we're gonna add a div with the class alert and alert warning that is only gonna be visible if the subscription object has the cancel at period end, which means the subscription is gonna cancel at the end of the period, and that's gonna be the message that is gonna be in the alert. Then we're just gonna print the period start date by using the subscription object like this, and also the current period end by using the subscription object as well. Then we're going to be adding a variable in the data section that is going to be called isLoading and is going to be set to false. And then in the HTML below the current period end, we're going to be adding a button with the class btn and btn primary. This button is going to be disabled if the variable isLoading is set to true. And also if it's loading, it's going to show loading in the text, or if it's not loading, then it's just going to show open my billing portal. We're going to add a click event to this button with the method open customer portal, and then in the method section of the component we're gonna create this asynchronous method, and then the first thing it's gonna do is set isLoading to true when it starts. Then we need to use get functions to get a functions instance, and we need to import this on top by calling it from the Firebase functions SDK. Then we're gonna use HTTPS callable to create a reference to the cloud function that is gonna generate the customer portal session link. For that, passing the functions instance, and then the name of the cloud function that we're trying to call, in this case is this one. Then we're gonna go ahead and asynchronously call it by passing in the return URL, which is only the current URL. Then once we receive the data, we're just gonna redirect the user to the data URL, and that's it. Now once this is done, you can go to the browser and see the account page with the button and the subscription information, and if we click the button, it's going to take you to the customer portal where you can manage your subscription, payment methods, and some other things. At this point, you should have a completely functional subscription application using Stripe and Firebase, and if you want to deploy this to production, you would only need to change maybe the Stripe keys to a production key, and that's it. In the next video, I'm going to be showing you how to deploy this to Firebase hosting, to different environments, maybe a staging environment, maybe a production environment as well. If you're interested in more of this type of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Check out the blog post and the Discord channel in case you have any questions. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.